We're gonna get you. A million thoughts in my head.
A Tony Brewer rant video. Guys, it's me, Tony Brewer, and basically seen as Donald Trump will be getting sworn in as the 45th President of the United States, and how loads of people like to complain about him, but the stars are refusing to attend and let alone perform. All these politicians are saying that they're not going to bother showing up, and even ticket sellers for Trump's inauguration and are selling at a loss. They are still not making any sales. This is to everyone in America because you may wind up having a 45th president, which absolutely no one likes. But over across the pond here in Britain, things basically haven't been all lovely buttercups and roses when it comes to people who've been running the country. So here is my today top 5 worst British Prime Ministers. James Callaghan, 1976 to 1979. Okay, so starting things off with the list, it is James Callaghan, and he basically returned after a bunch of trouble in the West Indies to a freezing cold and not that very good, much to say, UK. As at the time, things were rife with loads of strike, especially with things like mainers and car manufacturers. Yes. And although his government tried its best to go and make pretty much presumably ungovernable country governable, the one thing which his government will always be remembered for, along with James Callaghan himself, is the infamous Winter of Discontent, which was in 1978, where what happened was a whole motherload of stuff, where back then everybody went on strike. Everyone. Where there were things like bin men who were refusing to collect rubbish, pilots who were refusing to fly, and also in some areas, for James Callaghan, the grave diggers were refusing to bury the dead. So pretty much with those things in mind, it's not the best thing to wind up having on your resume. Moving in at number 4, it is, well, basically not a very good person. Because even though the last one ended up having, well, even though James Callaghan ended up having the Winter of Discontent on his shoulders, at least he didn't end up going and putting, say, Britain into a war it never wanted to fight in the first place. Tony Blair, 1997 to 2007. Okay, so in number 4 is Tony Blair. As basically for Tony Blair, things started off going well for him. As basically he promised in a new Labour after he beat the Tories and getting into power. And basically things did end up continuing going good for him, right up until after what happened in America, aka 9/11. And where after that happened, well, for Tony Blair, he ended up saying to, at the time, President George W. Bush that the two of them would be going into Iraq and take down the leader at the time, Saddam Hussein. And, well, when everyone in the UK found out that for the Prime Minister Tony Blair, he wanted to go and end up sending them to a war which very little people to no one wanted to fight, it ended up triggering protests and adding fuel onto the flame. Tony Blair said that people who weren't with the government's plan of invading Iraq were basically sort of, well, taking pity and taking the sides of Al-Qaeda, even though nobody was saying that what they'd done was bad, as they murdered 3,000 people across the United States. And from then on afterwards, for Tony Blair, things ended up going bad to worse for him. After he ended up soon turning from one of the most popular men in Britain to the country's most hated. And basically, things finally came to a climax when it came to this thing, which I think, if I recall correctly, it was the Chilcot Report. Like the Chilcot Inquiry, Chilcot Report or something. Basically, there was an inquiry or something done into what happened with the Iraq War. And basically, for Tony Blair, he got into one motherload of trouble for that. And if you want to see that, if you want to hear me going into detail about more things on Tony Blair, then basically what I will be doing is going and putting this thing at the end, which is like towards the Tony Blair rant thing I done ages ago. Anyways, basically, although that is bad, the next guy who took in charge after him didn't exactly end up finishing in the grand finale that he hoped, pretty much. And that person is Gordon Brown, 2007 to 2010. Okay, so for Gordon Brown, he ended up going and spending his entire life trying to become Prime Minister of Britain. And when he finally got in, he pretty much, some people may say he didn't exactly know what to do with it, as he ended up having to deal with a financial global crisis. This thing, because I think if in 2008, that was basically the time period of this event called Black Friday, or something, or Black Monday. Basically, I think there was an event back then, and in 2008, yeah, I don't know if that is right. You can, comment on down below and, tell me if it, was 2008 or not, but anyways. Basically, he had to deal with things like financial crisis, and also, along lot of other things too. Oh, thanks to his personality, I think it was. Yet nothing was the straw which broke the camel's back in the 2010 election was after he was recorded and said, well, basically there was an event where he was going at and talking to potential voters for Labour. And for one woman, she ended up asking him something about the Tories. And after that, he was being all nice and stuff. But when he went into the car to go it somewhere else, he didn't know he actually had his microphone thingy on his suit jacket thing still on. And you could clearly say, what a bigoted woman, which left the entire country stunned as to what he'd said, even leaving the woman he was earlier talked to and called a bigot, surprised. And in the end, it cost him the election, losing next to this guy who ended up being in a coalition, and which was if I recall rightly, something which didn't end up going very good. Yet then only went from bad to worse. And that guy he lost to was, well, this guy. David Cameron, 2010 to 2016. Okay, so basically with David Cameron, he beat the last guy at number 3, which was, I think I might have had over there. So, sorry. Anyways, for David Cameron, he beat Gordon Brown in the 2010 election for Prime Minister. Yeah, ended up being in a coalition with the Lib Dems and their leader at the time, Nick Clegg, who promised if he went into government, Clegg, not Cameron, that he wouldn't wind up going in an increasing in university fees for students. Yet what happened afterwards was something which wasn't very good. As what happened was student fee things for university people ended up going up. In fact, they even tripled or trebled, whichever one of the two words you want to use. And they went up, and things ended up going so bad that in the end, and for the Lib Dems, they ended up losing and for David Cameron, he ended up winning a Conservative majority in the 2015 election, which ended up not going very well, as although beforehand he had received extreme criticism from the majority, when he was plagued with things such as, say, I don't know, he done a tax on, say, pasties, which ended up causing a whole motherload of backlash. And when Labour ended up asking the Chancellor at the time, George Osborne, if he actually had a pasty in his life, like a corner pasty, the Chancellor then replied no, which then ended up putting forward that for David Cameron's government they were out of touch. And then afterwards there was other criticisms too of his ministerial time, Yeah, although the good news was him and his Chancellor George Osborne did get rid of things like the pasty tax and the caravan tax. They ended up rewarding the British public with something else called the bedroom tax, which they refused at the time to call it that and instead called it or insisted it to be called the spare room subsidy. And although some people ended up thinking it was a good thing, they ended up mainly criticizing which in who it was aimed at, where instead of it being aimed at all the people who were like all these rich people who with like loads and loads of bedrooms which were probably never used in their big houses. Instead, it mainly hit hardest people who were elderly or disabled, with figures showing two-thirds of houses affected by the bedroom tax ended up having at least one person who was elderly or disabled. Yet that wasn't the worst thing with the tax, as even military families in the UK were affected, and even people who were victims of domestic violence. And also, things went downhill from there on, with the United Nations describing the bedroom tax as a breach of human rights, but they ended up completely ignoring them. Besides, the EU obviously got it wrong along with everyone else that it wasn't a bedroom tax. But oh yes, that's right, it was. And things ended up going extremely bad when one elderly woman ended up walking onto the M1 and getting hit by a lorry in an act of suicide. And what happened afterwards was that her son read her suicide note, asking him not to blame himself, but to blame the Tory government and for what had happened, as she had lived in the house she was staying in for basically most of her life, made a family there, and basically she wasn't able to pay the bedroom tax by 20 quid, and the only housing she was offered was nowhere near any of her relatives. And add on things like how he dealt with riots in England after a man called Mark Duggan was shot by police. Yes, by being away on holiday left him to very harsh criticism. And then afterwards he got criticized for other things too, along with ending up causing people to panic over a strike by oil tanker drivers which never took place, causing traffic chaos, and even ending up putting forward scare stories that the Scottish National Party and Labour were in a coalition with each other, even though both of the two party leaders said there was no such thing or wanted such thing, and both of the party's supporters basically they just went on scaremongering stuff, which then pretty much succeeded. But then after that, things ended up going pretty badly. After a vote in the EU referendum membership of the United Kingdom, where he mainly focused on very few details on why Britain should stay in the EU rather than, well, to sum things up, he focused too much on why Britain shouldn't leave the EU rather than why the country should stay in the EU. Saying that rather repetitively that the UK was stronger, safer, and better off in the United Kingdom. And in the end, regardless of how hard he worked, he'll always go down the way his party members mainly saw him, as a posh boy who didn't even know the price of milk. Anyways, you may have thought that those 4 prime ministers were bad, yet soon you're going to see which one, in my opinion, is the absolute worst of them all, like the creme de la creme, the cherry on top of the cake, or whatever kind of thing. I ran out of ways to describe the worst of the worst. Yes. So, before I end up showing you who, in my opinion, was the worst Prime Minister of Great Britain, let's do a recount on who is in the not so very good Prime Ministers list. James Callaghan, 1976 to 1979. Tony Blair, 1997 to 2007. Gordon Brown, 2007 to 2010. David Cameron, 2010 to 2016. And the number one president, number one worst Prime Minister of Britain happens to be the one and only first female Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher. And basically things went good for her. Margaret Thatcher, things started out good for her. Indeed, as she started out as a grocer's daughter, and ended up in the end going into politics, and then also ended up stating on TV that more than likely a woman would never wind up becoming Prime Minister, or that she didn't think a woman would become Prime Minister. Yet fortunately she got proven wrong, and she ended up becoming Prime Minister in 1979, and ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff such as dealing with the Falklands War, and dealing with miners going on strike. Yet sadly for Margaret Thatcher, her reputation ended up being a bit, controversial to some, as although the people who gave her praise and that celebrated her stuff ended up calling her the Iron Lady, as she ended up refusing to bow down to pressure from people such as in the Labour Party, saying phrases like, "You turn if you want to. A woman is not for turning," and other things like, under Labour, a land of hope and glory has become the land of beg and borrow. As for her critics, they called her something else. Thatcher the Milk Snatcher. Yeah, that kind of one seems a bit mean for some people. Yet the thing was, was that many of her critics were from Scotland, which would include at the time probably people like me, unfortunately, where she was pretty much thought of by the Scottish public, but she saw the people of Scotland as no more than a bunch of guinea pigs, where she would test out her policies for running the country, with one of the most infamous ones of all being the poll tax, which ended up being so bad people even started to riot in the streets. And in the end, and she lost, but in the end she ended up losing and then leaving the women like meh, meh, double cold shiver. Anyway, she ended up losing the election and ended up no longer being Prime Minister in 1990. Yet, sadly for her, things didn't end there, as unfortunately she died in April 2013 after having a stroke at age 87. Yet people who were criticizing her in the past ended up saying "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead." Yeah, they used the song "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" for the song, the film The Wizard of Oz. I mean, for somebody to be to like wind up being that controversial would indefinitely end up being pretty bad. Like when it would come to like bringing the country together and not being all controversial. And in fact, a poll was done a few like months or so ago on who was the worst British Prime Minister. And the winner was Margaret Thatcher, beating David Cameron by about, 2 points. And to end up having that kind of a legacy where people would wind up singing "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" and like skipping over her grave in a kind of way like that, that person would definitely have to be the worst president. Not worst president, I mean like the worst Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And basically, as for the Times, it basically says that things aren't, well, very good and stuff. Where loads of people tend to view the three main parties, Labour, Conservative, and Liberal Democrat, as mainly just one big party, where the three of them all joined at the hip. Yeah, basically, well, that's it for me in this rant video thing. Oh, Obama's on just now giving his last news conference. Oh, what joy. One thing's for sure, I definitely bet that, like, Clinton was with, like, almost losing the train of thought or something. I blame that video from Joey Salads where he goes on and on and on about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I mean, seriously. One thing's for sure, uh, for politics in America and Britain, where people were probably proven wrong when they thought that there wouldn't be a worse president of the United States. It's been George W. Bush to get gone and proven wrong thanks to Donald Trump, even if it was unintentionally on his part, there will more than likely be a worse Prime Minister than Margaret Thatcher was. Yet more than likely it may be pretty difficult for that kind of thing to get beaten. Anyways, if you liked this video, then don't forget to go and give it a thumbs up. You can comment on it down below as to whether or not you think that Margaret Thatcher was the worst Prime Minister which Britain's ever had. And if you want to see more of my cool videos, then you can go and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, if you want to see the rant video which I done on Tony Blair, then I will also be leaving a doohickey boxing for it in the end card. So, until next time, bye bye!